Our scripture lesson today is from Psalms, Psalm 124, verses 6 through 8. Blessed is Yahweh, who has not given us for prey to the teeth of our enemies. We have escaped like a bird from the snare of the fowlers. The snare is broken. We have escaped. Our help is in the name of Yahweh, the maker of heaven and earth.
So, dear friends, we continue our series on avian theology about the birds. And there is something in the nature of our God that does not like fowlers, those who are catching birds in traps or nets or on a glue, as I talked with children. We have just heard the psalmist to sing, "We have escaped like a little bird from the fowler's nests. The arm trap is broken. We have escaped. Our help is in the name of the Lord, the maker of heavens and the earth." And this is, dear friends, not the only passage which mentions fowlers and catching birds in the Bible. In the Hebrew Bible, there are actually more references to catching birds or fowlers than to fishermen. And catching birds is mentioned more often than catching fish. Only Gospels make it more balanced. As you know, Jesus' disciples were fishermen, and they often commented like going fishing and so on, so that brings that to some balance. But even Jesus knew the price of 2 sparrows for a penny, or asarion. That was in Gospel of Matthew. In Luke, 5 sparrows for 2 pennies. No, it got cheaper. But in biblical times, fowling was a common and known way of hunting. Probably because it's one of the migratory routes from Europe down to Africa. It was common but not popular. Certainly not popular among the biblical authors. Fowlers had a very bad reputation. Take, for instance, Jeremiah, who says, "Criminals are found among my people. They hide, lurk like fowlers, setting traps, but these set traps to catch people." Or advice from the book of Proverbs, "Save yourself like a gazelle from the hunter, like a bird from the hand of a fowler." On a closer investigation, it becomes quite clear why it was so. Because there was this objective difference in size of a power of that big fowler and just that minuscule, gentle, fragile prey. And then, additionally, there was this presence of deception, luring, trapping, netting, baiting. I guess it was common experience also of the people of God. On a national level, as small nations of Israel and Judea, surrounded by superpowers of that time, Egypt, Assyria, Babylonia, Hellenistic kingdoms, Roman Empire, and then those small nations. On a social level, farmers, small people, pulled into and trapped in intrigues and games of rich and powerful nobility or those living in the large cities. And on a personal level, trapped by their origin, descent, circumstance, employment, by their family. That was an old time. You cannot just leave your family behind. Family was the unit in which every individual existed, whether he or she wanted or not. I believe that in one way or another, we all can relate and understand. Because there were times in our own lives when we felt like a trapped bird. Feeling like a little bird, trapped, deceived, and taken advantage. But then I think that this biblical message of the Psalm 124 and other passages tells us, in that situation, remember, there is something in the nature of our God that does not like foulers. There is something in the nature of our God that always sides with the little birds. But it goes both ways. If we feel like a little bird, then that is an encouragement. And if we are, and it can happen, in a power or position of power, then this passage and this image, this metaphor is a warning. Remember how it was when you were like a little bird. And if you are in a position of power, don't do that like it was done to you. Now I want to share with you my personal experience. And here I'll maybe ask for a picture. This is, I took this picture when I was growing up. Of course, we did not have digital cameras and so on, but I actually saw and enjoyed this. This is from Hawaii, leeward part just above Kona in Big Island, and this is a saffron finch escaping through the fence there, but we can take it down for now. When I was born under the mountains similar to our American Adirondacks, but in Central Europe, in that place where the borders these days of Czech Republic, Germany, and Poland meet. And in those mountains, there were a number of geographic features with names derived from fowling, for catching birds and trapping them. In past centuries, it must have been a common way of hunting small migratory birds, especially for just regular peasants, on their way from Scandinavia down to Mediterranean and back. That was, of course, in distant past. When I was growing up, there were no fowlers anymore. Or I'm not aware, maybe there was one left. But songbirds were still migrating through our region in large flocks, grosbeaks, waxwings, finches, robins. And it was a bittersweet experience growing up in those mountains, but under communism. And we were locked in that country. We looked with envy at those little birds flying from Sweden and Norway down to Greece or Italy and beyond, in areas we could not reach. Those birds were free to go while we were trapped behind the Iron Curtain. behind tall electrical fences and minefields, searchlights and watchtowers with armed guards, like in some prison or prison camp. He felt like in Fowler's birdcage. And then came the year 1989 and the collapse of communism. And here I'll ask for another picture. And on our borders, those fences got destroyed. Here you see that they are clipping them. That's actually the closest person is, bless his heart, Hans Dietrich Genscher. And next to him, with that funny mustache, is Jiří Dinspier. And those were foreign ministers, ministers of foreign affairs of Germany and Czechoslovakia at that time. And on December 23rd, 1989, they came and with these big scissors, they cut through the Iron Curtain. It is difficult to describe how we felt. It was a moment like that from the psalm, like a little bird from the fowler's nets. The arm trapped, broken. We had escaped. Of course, we could not travel immediately. It took some time. The other thing was that, finances were short, but at least we could go. We were not under that stifling experience. But now I want to share something more. Then last spring, we went for a birdwatching holiday to South Arizona. South Arizona is very interesting because it has completely different biota from the rest of the United States. People don't know. It actually more belongs, at least in respect of live things there, to Mexico than to the United States. And if you want to have larger knowledge of birds in America, you need to go there because you will meet all those Mexican birds there. So we went there birdwatching, for birdwatching holiday in South Arizona, and it felt like an scary deja vu, repetition of life. Because again, we were in a region where there was a border zone, and under communism there was an exclusion zone of like 10 kilometers or something like that. Over here, it was 40, 50, 60 miles border zone with watch cameras and towers and observation blimps. You drive there and you see something on the sky and you think, what is that? And there is this white blimp there, tethered by a cord, and there are several of them along the border, and that is for observation of the border area there. It is not for entertainment or anything like that. It is just to catch people. Checkpoints, fully armed, tripwires, snares, border patrols, literally catching and hunting people. Of course, not shooting them, capturing them, but taking them to prisons or deporting them, splitting the families, and it is still happening. On our own border. Ugly, gargantuan, grotesque fence. And here I'll ask for another picture. So here you have it. And I cannot explain how tall it is and how crazy that situation there is. And yes, in communism, we could not get all the way to that fence because we were there were those minefields and other zones in front of it. Here it is a little more subtle, but when you are right next to it and look up, it is almost like touching the beginning of those arches over here in our sanctuary. That tall it is. It is very imposing. Separating literally neighbors from each other. Until recently, neighbors from both sides of the border were neighbors. And they shared their stores, and there was one bar, and both sides would go there, one gas station, one soccer field. Now they are cut apart, divided, trapped by these ugly, malevolent fowlers, chauvinist, impotent politicians. On my first visit to the border, I took that picture which we saw. Can we go back to that picture? Yes, so I took this picture on our first visit. Later on, we discovered actually that it's actually useless on our second or third visit by the volunteers local, because every mile there is a big gap. So, all this building of the imposing wall, and then it is useless because there is a gap that you can take a truck through it very often. It does not make sense. And it is because they did not want to take time to build that properly, and there are those wadis, those dry streams, and they would need to build it more diligently so that the water will not take it down and when it rains. And so there is a gap every 1 mile or 2 miles, there is a big gap. But we did not see it on our first visit. We saw only this enormous, imposing wall. It is really ugly. But then, as I was processing this picture later that day in a hotel, I noticed something. I took a closer look, and can you see it here? On the top of that wall is sitting a pigeon, a dove, almost white. It's difficult to process that picture because it's kind of overexposed over against that black wall. And I took it as a divine omen, as a divine sign from God. There is something in nature of our God that does not like fowlers and does not like fences or these nets trapping people and dividing them. Does not like wall. Those walls, those fences will come down. That is, that bird assured me of it. It's only a matter of time because it is a divine law, as strong, if not stronger, than the laws of nature. If not anything else, erosion and gravity will take down that wall, as it is already happening in certain sections. By gravity and divine law, those fences, all traps and nooses and snares will eventually come down. And now you know why I have a visceral reaction to any border fences and walls. It is deeper than visceral, actually. It is part of my faith, my religion, part of my heart. But from that moment on the southern militarized border, when I saw or discovered that dove, and with that experience of militarized border, and being a stubborn Calvinist, we continue coming back to that place and work in our small way in taking those walls down and undoing those ugly, dangerous, but ultimately impotent fowlers and their tricks. And in February, we plan a mission trip to work with border Samaritans down there, building bridges, bringing water to the desert for those who desperately need drink and very often are actually dying of thirst there on our southern borders. And so trying to do as much as we can to save lives until those fowlers, nets, and walls come down, as they certainly will.